The point of this diagram is to give you some idea as far as everything that you know, and maybe not everything that you know, in terms of operating a classroom. Because the classroom is an organization, it is a culture. So therefore, if you don't have, in terms of handling conflict, for example.
The way that I understand this the best is in comprehension, you can tell me what I've given you in terms, or a book has given you, or a video has given you, but you can do it in your own words. You're not just giving me back rote, memorized facts. And that's a really big difference. If you were reading, for example, you know that you can think back about reading tests. Your reading tests often had knowledge information about who was the father in the story, who was the whoever in the story, where did the story take place, okay? Then you had comprehension questions where you had to summarize in your own words what was the story about. Does that make sense? You weren't giving back the same words. You were using your own vocabulary, your own words, and you were explaining something to me in your own words, not in textbook words or teacher words. Okay? So that's a little bit harder to do. I might ask you to interpret or rewrite or convert or give an example of something rather than just say what year, what person, what day, etc. The next level of Bloom says, it's called application. It means that I can take what I've learned and I can apply it to a real life problem. Let me try to use, I'll use family consumer science as an example. If you did a lesson on how to make biscuits and you did a demonstration and you showed taught students how to measure ingredients properly, and you gave a demonstration on how to mix the ingredients and how to roll out the biscuits and cut them and make them. The next step might be then the students have to make their own biscuits. So they have to apply what they've learned by doing something themselves. Make sense? Art teachers, if you give a demonstration, you have a sample of a piece of artwork or a kind of project you want them to do, and you go through some kind of modeling about how to do it. Now when they apply that to their own project, that's application. That makes sense. We've made a big jump now. We're no longer talking about it, but we're using the information to do something. I can teach you, it doesn't have to be a hands-on thing. Exactly, it could be, let's say I'm teaching you a process to use to solve problems. And then I give you a problem, and you have to solve the problem and apply the process I give you. That would be another example. So you're no longer just giving back what somebody else is giving you, because in knowledge, you're giving it back in the exact words. In comprehension, you're using your own words. Now you can do that. Let's see you apply it to a problem and use it for something. You're using the information to do something. The next step on Bloom's is analysis. Let's say now I know the information, I can tell you about it in my own words, I've applied it to some project or process or activity that I've done. Now the next step is I know it well enough, I can analyze it now. I can compare my work with Arlene's work, and I can find what's the same about them, what we've done differently. I could compare and contrast, I could deduct something from it, I could infer, I could analyze, I could categorize. It really requires higher level thinking skills in order to analyze something. I have to be able to do more than just parrot back information. I have to be able to take a finished product or a piece of work and look at it and analyze it and maybe determine what's correct about it, what's incorrect, make changes, etc. Also, when you have students categorize things, like, can some of you give me an example, like if you give them a list of things, they have to sort it out into who's pyramid, that's one we can all understand, where they would sort things out. That's at this level too, because they have to know what it is, what category it goes in, they're analyzing, and sort it out. Okay, the next level is synthesis. And the way I relate to synthesis is I had you do a synthesis activity. When you synthesize, you're doing something new. You're creating something new. Synthesis is a very high-level thinking skill. I asked you, what if Columbus landed on the East Coast? You were in the synthesis mode then. You were creating a new America, and was very creative at this point. For example, to follow through with the biscuits, let's say that there would be a variety of ways, or I might season biscuits or add or modify the biscuit recipe. I might make scones instead. I might put fruits and raisins and whatever in them. I could modify and decide, I like the concept of eating a biscuit at breakfast, but I want to do something different with it. I'm tired of just a plain old biscuit with butter and jelly. I want to do something different. So then you might synthesize and come up with maybe doing a different type of biscuit with different ways to season it, etc. So you understand that you were in synthesis with the Columbus example, because you were creating something that didn't exist. And it's fun. It should be more fun when you get to this. Now, can we always do this? No. We can't always do this with the kind of lessons we're doing. But this is when you really know knowledge and you can put it together and create something new out of it. The last and highest level is not only do I know it so well that I can now judge someone else. Art people, these would be the students you might ask to judge the 7th grade art show, because they are really good students, and you might select a panel that would judge other people's work. Family consumer science people, you might ask to have some tasters who would perhaps, or some judges who might go around and break the biscuits open, look at the texture, taste them, etc., and judge or critique. You certainly will do that as a teacher many times. But that's the highest level. That's where you're operating from with your content. You know it so well that you're able to do this for your students. But you also want to get your students up to, in some instances, to this level. Because then they really own the knowledge. Now keep in perspective, we're talking about the cognitive domain, which is the know part on this triangle. All of these are in the cognitive domain. Okay? Let's look at the handout. I had an extra one, but I'll just go on with you. On the next page is after the page where the list is, you have a list of verbs. And when you write objectives, the first thing you want to decide is, where in Bloom's do I want to be with this lesson? Does that make sense to you now? How far do I want students to be able to go today? If it's something brand new, you may just be at knowledge comprehension. Does that make sense? If it's well into the lesson and they're getting pretty good with it, you might want them to apply it. You probably would not get to synthesis unless it's something they're really, really comfortable with. Now, in some content areas, you'll move faster than others. Probably in art, you move pretty fast, I'm guessing, or not in art, but I would say you get from knowledge to synthesis pretty fast there, where some of the rest of us might not get there so fast.
You don't always have to start with knowledge.
Okay, and that's a good point, because what you can do is assess what your students already know. And if you're in the second level of a class, for example, you can assume they have certain knowledge. Or if you're, what's your area? English. If you were in elementary school, you would know at each grade level about what to expect. When they get to your class in the high school, you probably assume a lot of knowledge that may or may not be there. Would that be a fair thing to say? You don't assume you're going to start from square one. Okay. But if you're going to teach a novel, you probably would be starting there. Make sense? Okay. Once you know where you want to start with your lesson, then look at the verbs that are there, and they're used for two reasons. They're used to create objectives, and objectives usually start with the student will be able to, and if you are at knowledge level, you just look through this list and say, I want them to be able to label the food pyramid. Does that make sense? That's knowledge. I want them to be able to list examples of vegetables. That would be knowledge. I have all kinds of things. I wanted you to be able to name who discovered America, et cetera, et cetera. Comprehension. Notice the verbs change. Describe, differentiate, discuss, distinguish, paraphrase, predict, all kinds of things. Application, you apply, you calculate, you construct, you demonstrate, et cetera, et cetera. On analysis, of course, it's easy to use the word analyze there, but appraise, compare, criticize, I think that should be contrast, not contrast. Diagram, differentiate, experiment, et cetera. Synthesis, assemble, compose, design, illustrate, invent. Evaluation, after looking at whatever in the novel, tell what's likely to occur. We just finished chapter 3 of the novel today. What do you think is going to happen in chapter 4? Etc. Measure, predict, score, select, etc. On the next page, I give you an example of taking the 3 little pigs. I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's a good, well, for you. I think we only have one English person in here, but the rest of you could relate to that because we all know the story of the 3 little pigs. It gives you some activities for the students to do, which would be more questions in this case. The kinds of questions you would ask to get at what they know. It's hard, I want you to understand we're talking about 2 things. If this were my lesson, and I were writing objectives, my objective would say, let's look at knowledge. The students will be able to name the characters of 3 little pigs. That's an objective. I can turn around now and assess by saying, name the characters of 3 little pigs. You see what I'm getting at? The objective and the assessment is the same. Your objective would not be where did the story take place. Your objective would be the student will be able to identify where the story took place. Your assessment is, whether it's a verbal question or a test question, where did the story take place? So you take your objective, turn it into a question. And so you have objectives, assessments, matching. A good example I can give you of this that would be incorrect, I told you before that I taught typing. When I taught typing, if I had them take a written test about how to type a business letter, that's not a very good assessment. That's not my objective. My objective is not for them to be able to walk in and apply for a job and sit down and say to the employer, let me write an essay for you on how to type a business letter. Okay? the objective is to be able to type the business letter in correctly. So I need an application level. I have to have a match between my objective and my assessment. And you could go all the way through this. You need more examples of comprehension, application, etc. They're there. Let's take a few of these on the next page. Why don't you work with someone, just however is comfortable where you're seated, 3 or 4 people. See if you can work through this list and talk about it. We may not get all of them done, but see, let me just see how you're doing with this. Read things into it that aren't there, so sometimes it can be more than one thing when you start saying, but I was thinking this and that and this, and that's okay to do that, so what you think about it. And number 1, what people were in the story. Let's start back here with you. What people were in the story? No. What things were real and unreal? Real or unreal? What do you think, Dan? That's what I would say.
Comprehension.
I think it's higher than that. I have analysis. You have to analyze what's real. Do you agree? I mean, do you see where? I'm not sure there's only one right answer to these, and it's not worth debating over. But to me, if you have to figure out what's real and what's not real, you're analyzing. That's pretty high level to be able to do that. Because you would have to do a lot of, if we're talking about the story here, you'd have to really read the story, you have to really understand the story to know what's real and what's not real. If you don't really understand, which is comprehension, you wouldn't be able to do that, so I think it's higher than that. Okay, explain in your own words, that should be a clue. Comprehension. Where did most of the action in the story take place? Knowledge. Compare this story to the one we read yesterday. Which was a more exciting story and why? I have a couple this could be in my analysis. What do you have? Analysis? I have that. It might be something else. I think analysis is good. You obviously are comparing one thing with another. Compare and contrast is analysis.
Evaluation.
It might be an evaluation too, because your evaluation of which was the most exciting one might differ from mine. So I almost see the first one as being analysis and the second sentence as being evaluation. So as long as you're up in the ballpark there to know it's higher than just knowledge comprehension. When did the story take place is what? Knowledge. Select a new title. The word new should be the clue. Synthesis. When you create something new, it's synthesis. Write a diary like one you think the astronauts would have kept. Synthesis again. We don't know. When we're doing synthesis, we can't say, if you write a diary, Rebecca, I can't say that's correct or not correct because we're in synthesis, we're creating. And there hasn't been one yet, so we don't have anything to compare it to. List 6 facts from the article. Perhaps, I think it's a little bit higher. I know it says list, and if you keyed it on list, you did what I asked you to do, which was key in on the verb. But it seems to me that if we're, and here again, now here I am reading into it. If you have to understand what a fact is, you have to comprehend what a fact is, so we might be looking at trying to determine fact from opinion, which is analysis, or at least comprehension. I'd say it has to be a little bit higher. I'm not sure. If you list the names, so here we are reading a lot, I'm reading a lot into that. Again, there could be more than one answer. Okay, if the main character were to visit our classroom, what would he do? Now, this may not be as high as you might have guessed. When we predict, we usually are at what level? application. If you had synthesis or, you're thinking about something new, I would not necessarily argue with you on that. But prediction is we're analyzing the situation and trying to predict what might happen. So here I use the word analysis also. Again, it's kind of got to know where you're coming from with this. If you outline the action in the story, if I ask you to outline the story, what do you have to do to outline? Well, you have to have at least that.
Application.
I think analyze. Here again, we could have some debate, but it seems like we're taking something and breaking it down into small parts. We have to analyze. We have to have some kind of a concept of how to make the outline, to analyze the story to see what kind of outline headings we would have and how we would break it down. What was the cause of the main happening? What do you think? Cause effect. So if we're not always getting them right, yeah, you have to have at least comprehension. I would say that's a good answer. There could be analysis too, because it could be cause effect. You have to be able to analyze those cause effect. Write a different ending is what? Synthesis. Find words in the story that rhyme and write them in pairs. Right? Do I have to have anything beyond knowing what a rhyme is? I don't know. Maybe not. I have analysis. I'm not really sure why to justify that real well, but we know we're at least beyond just knowledge at that point. Classify them and sort them. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Okay. All right. Hopefully you're starting to get into how to use this and how to work with it. I'll do one more activity with the cognitive part, and then we'll go to the other two parts. Okay, what is this that I'm holding in my hand? Anybody? A Valentine's card. What are Valentines used for? Why do we have a card like this, a Valentine's card?
Tell people you love them or like them.
Tell people you like them. What else? Okay. Tell me when I would use this card.
February 14th.
February 14th. Okay. What are some things that you would typically, maybe not all, in addition to what's on here or including what's on here, what are some kinds of things you would normally see, symbols on a Valentine's card? Cupid, hearts, X's and O's, pink and red, kiss marks, lips. Okay. This chocolate, oh, that's good. This Valentine, it says love is the most important thing a Valentine can ever bring, and if you can be sure love had a part in these warm wishes from the heart. This is kind of just a general Valentine that tells someone that you care for them. What other kind of Valentines are there? For friends, sometimes if you ever try to look for a Valentine for just a friend, it's real hard to do that because you don't want the language to be too strong. If you've ever had that experience of you have a good friend and you like to send them a Valentine, sometimes it's hard to find that kind. What other kind of Valentine? For parents, so there could be for relatives, for parents, for aunts, for grandparents, for sons and daughters, nieces and nephews. What other kind? Teachers? Humorous Valentine. There could be a funny Valentine that really doesn't express love except in some kind of humorous way. Okay, so you could use other items to do the same thing. Can you think of other kinds of Valentines? We've had funny, we've had serious ones, we've had ones appropriate for relatives, little kid ones for children, for young children. Can you think of any other kinds?
Handmade or store-bought.
Handmade or store-bought, good. Computer made. Okay.
Or aunts and uncles.
One kind that I think of is a hurtful Valentine. Have you ever seen a Valentine that had some kind of comments that were hurtful instead of loving? Your sister gave you one, and it worked, didn't it? Can you remember what it said?
I can't read it.
Okay, it's all right.
It was pretty bad.
Okay, but would we agree that there are some Valentines that might hurt someone's feelings? As well as telling
I
them.
don't know if they, I mean, they may mean it, but I don't know if they directly mean it. And I think she was trying to be kind of humorous, but it came across the wrong way.
Okay. What happens in schools? I don't know, maybe it doesn't happen anymore. When I was a kid, what do we do with Valentine's in schools? Did any of you experience something? Maybe I'm really dating myself. You exchange them. Did you still do that when you were in school?
Mhm.
Did you create your Valentine box, shoe box or something? How many of you had that experience? Where you got to decorate some kind of box, put them up and people put Valentines in? What are some of the pitfalls of that in schools? What are some of the bad things about it?
Well, I don't know if the younger kids are so bad, but the older kids tend not to give everybody one, and you've got some kids who feel left out.
So you can't monitor what they're going to say.
Other comments? What's some good things about it?
It established, I'm sorry.
It's,
Rebecca.
it's a good activity for them to do for the same birds, writing down everybody's names, and for younger kids it would be.
It's true.
Okay.
I was going to say establishes a tradition.
Okay.
Mine is also most socially versus expectations.
Okay. So then I might stop this lesson on Valentine's by saying that I'm going to get now into an independent learning assignment, which would be to have you break into groups and have group A, we're not going to really do this, but have group A create a Valentine appropriate for a mother, group B create a humorous Valentine. Do you see where I'm going with this? So I'm up to synthesis, where we've had a lesson about Valentine's, and I would think at this point that you might be able to create a certain kind of Valentine if assigned. Okay? And I've gone all the way from what was it up to create one. Okay? Simple, up the ladder with blues. Okay? Now, the rest of this work that you need to refer to are the other parts of domains, the be likes and the do's. And that's in your handout, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this in some repetition, but I do want to go over it enough that you understand it. The affective domain has only 5 levels. Now remember, cognitive has knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. The affective domain, look at the 5 italicized words: receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, internalizing. What we're talking about here are things that are affective. And I would think, now you correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that you people in art would start to see that this somehow fits you better. It may or may not. I can see where you have certainly the cognitive area as well. But if you were teaching an art history class, or if you were concerned about appreciation for art, an art appreciation issue, it might be that you could really relate to this when you look at receiving. It's awareness of the stimulus and the beginning of favorable feelings toward it. In other words, this is not something we measure on a test with knowledge, like cognitive things. We're talking here about a feeling, beginning to feel good about it. If you look at the receiving, there are verbs for this as well: ask, choose, describe, etc. It says, and some examples: the student pays close attention to the directions for enrichment activities. The student listens attentively to the ideas of others. The student demonstrates sensitivity to the concerns. A lot of times when we do cooperative learning, we also work on affective skills, and I will be doing some in-depth work with you in cooperative learning where we learn to work together, and part of it is to learn material, but another part of it is to learn to appreciate other people's points of view and to deal with things like that. So then we're into the affective things associated with learning. All right, so let's carry through. If we're doing art appreciation, you might, the examples were not good for that, but we might say that students start to pay attention to pieces of art in the room, or pay attention to community events.
Respond.
And viewing it favorably. So they're not only just going to walk in and notice that, oh, the teacher put new pieces of art on the wall today, but they're going to start to become engaged with it. They're receiving it. They're looking at it. They're thinking about do I like that one? Do I not like it? I'm doing more than just noticing it. I'm actually receiving it at this point. Responding to it. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong word. I am getting engaged in it in some way. So the student reads for enrichment, discusses what others have said, willingly cooperates with others in group activities. Valuing, that has to do with your beliefs, your attitudes, and your appreciation. And notice there are action verbs for that as well. And some examples: the student protests against racial discrimination. The student supports actions against gender discrimination. The student argues in favor of or against abortion rights. So now we're not only becoming aware of something and responding to it, but we're becoming advocates for or against it, or we take a position on it in valuing it. We decide how we feel about it, and we have strong beliefs about that. Organizing, fourth level. Look at your verbs: adhere, alter, arrange, etc. Here we form judgments concerning proper behavior in the classroom. Forms and adheres to a personal standard of work ethics. Student defends the important values. Again, a little bit stronger now. We not only are real set about our beliefs, but we defend them, and we form judgments related to those beliefs, either for or against. And internalizing is when you have it inside you. You have a code of behavior, work ethic, or whatever it is that's inside you. It's a part of you. It has become something that is part of your personality and your being. Those all have to do with the be-likes. They're harder to assess, and you maybe don't always assess the affective things. We've talked about affective activities in classes, things such as, well, our other classes got more into this, DARE, and other programs, PrEP, and other programs you see around the school. In fact, out in this hallway, there's a big PrEP poster about responsibility and character education, those kinds of things. You can't always assess that, but you strive for it. That's what you hope for. And you try to create the atmosphere in your classroom that happens. But you may not give them a test order. Does that make sense? But that's the be-likes. That's what you want them to. That's kind of the good part of learning, that you want them to get out of it, but it's not something you may put on a test. Okay, psychomotor is another domain. Physical education people would use psychomotor domain most of the time, although there would be some cognitive domain issues with them as well. But very often in testing and assessing students, they're in the psychomotor domain. You also, though, in art would have this. You would have it in family and consumer science. I certainly had business education in some of the things that we did where you are concerned with psychomotor skills. Those are physical movements. And they go from movement, manipulating, communicating, and creating. Let's look at just some examples. Movement involves gross correctly grasps and carries the globe to the workstation. That would be an elementary one. But in your case, if you were teaching calligraphy and you could relate that to the student correctly grasp the pen or holds the paintbrush or models the clay or whatever. There might be something also in facts with which you would check to see if the student holds the scissors correctly or positions the fabric in the sewing machine correctly, things like that. Fine motor, assemble, build, calibrate, connect, and thread. They will correctly calculate distances on a map. I think that's not a very good example, because to me, if you can calculate, that's a cognitive thing, calculating distances. I don't like that example. I think in psychomotor, it's better if you can think of literally things they're going to do with their hands, where calculating the distance on a globe to me is a mental thing. Do you disagree with me there? I don't like that example.
Maybe it's grid.
Could be. You might be using a calculator. That's, it takes some psychomotor skills to do that, or you might be using a ruler and, or a, well, I don't guess they ever use a slide ruler these days to do anything, do we? But some kind of instrument that you would have to manipulate. Communicating involves the communication of ideas and feelings. And this one talks about they will describe their feelings conveyed by the author of the poem. And see, I think there's a lot of overlap in these, and that's why I don't spend a lot of time on these last two, because I can look at that and see, yes, that is maybe feelings or a psychomotor issue, but I have some question about that, because if I'm going to describe my feelings, I might be analyzing as well. So don't worry if you see some gray areas here that we could maybe put in one place or another. Creating. Usually in the psychomotor domain, when you're creating, you're actually doing something with your hands. You're creating something with your hands. So that could be, we could all think of examples in our areas. Okay. That's pretty quick on the last two, but there is some overlap. I think if you get the cognitive down, you can pretty well deal with that one. And now let's look at your assignments, and then we'll close out for today. On page 8 in your syllabus, the beginning, I told you you had some assignments related to this. I want to make sure we understand them. I want you to write some instructional objectives for your content area. I want you to select a class that you would be a typical kind of class that you would teach in your area. You can choose the class. Whatever, just pick any class so you can identify for me that these would be typical objectives in a class. Okay? I would want you to tell me what class they're written for. That's your choice. You can pick a middle school, a secondary class, a specialized class, a general class, whatever you want. And then I want you to write 5 objectives in the cognitive domain, 5 objectives in the affective domain, 5 objectives in the psychomotor domain. And I would like for you, when you write those, I would prefer they be typed, but if you really don't want to type this assignment, you may write it out. Just tell me. Just have cognitive, give me 5. Affective, give me 5. Psychomotor, give me 5. That make sense? Everybody clear about that? I don't want to have to try to figure out which they were, which you intended them to be.
And this is for the same lesson.
Yes, why don't you stay with the same course? If that becomes a problem and you can't manage it with the same course, then just tell me if you change courses. Change courses in midstream here. It's okay. I mean, if you think of a course you really would like to write for and you suddenly get to psychomotor and you think, I'm stuck, I can't do that. But I could do it if I had chosen another course, go ahead and change it. I think it would be easier on you to see if you really understand this, you can apply it if you stay with the same course. But if it's not humanly possible, just tell me what you're doing as you go. Everybody clear on those objectives? You end up with 15 objectives, and they're due October 15th. If you get them done before, you can turn them in anytime. down to 6 because I want you to pick one topic and write 10 questions. And write the questions according to Bloom's. Now if I were going to do this assignment, this is the way I would do it. I would write my objectives for the course I selected, then I'd get another piece of paper and write questions that match those objectives because you're pretty much just restating the question for it. Does that make sense? That would be the easy way to do the assignment. To stick with the same class, the same set of objectives, and now write 10 questions. And what I would like for you to do with your questions is to label them. What are you going for? Are you going for knowledge, comprehension, analysis, application, analysis, and evaluation? What are you going for on these questions? Just label them for me.
So on the question that they should stick with the cognitive domain then?
Yes, that's a good question. Stick with the cognitive domain on the questions. So in order to have 10, you may have, I don't care how many you have. I'm not saying make one of each. I'm saying write me 10 questions. Tell me what your intent is. You may have 2 that are analysis, 3 that are comprehension, 1 that's, you understand? I do want some variety in it. Don't give me 10 knowledge questions. Try to get some variety. If you don't have all levels of Bloom's, that's okay, but at least hit for 3, 4, 5 levels of Bloom's.
Argue our point if we decided something that we would think would be different.
Sure, that's fair.
Now then, and then these two things are treated as number 5. Is that
Okay, now, not necessarily. They may, if you want them to. Number 5 is to prepare a lesson plan using an instructional model, and I'd like for you to use the Madeline Hunter. There's a reason why I'm doing that. Bob is using a contextual model, which I'm not spending time with you in this class on. And I'm doing that in a later class in 337. The reason I want you to know Madeline Hunter is many of the schools still use it. And I want you to be familiar with it. I will show you another lesson design, but this is the one that for this class purposes is the best place to start. Because I consider 200 you're just beginning, which may or may not be the case for some of you, but that's the way we look at this course, is that it's a beginning course.
is book walking for?
No, you may use this one in your mini lesson. That's a good question. Now, let me suggest that the lesson plan be done on your mini lesson. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. That you not try to make 2 lesson plans. Not make just a lesson plan for nothing, but to figure out what your mini lesson is going to be and do your lesson plan for it. Now, I'll even go this far. That's a November 12 deadline. If you have not taught your mini lesson before November 12, you may hold on to that assignment until you do. I'm thinking of ways to cut out some work here for you. What I'm saying is your lesson plan should be the lesson plan for your mini lesson. And if you have not taught your mini lesson by November 12, ignore the deadline date, and I will collect your lesson plan when I observe your mini lesson. Does that make sense? Because you don't have to do 2 of these. That should cut out a little bit for you. So you can make a note by November 12th and just say when I do my mini lesson instead of November 12th. So if you do it before November 12th, when I come and observe your lesson, I will want you to hand me a written lesson plan using the Madeline Hunter lesson design. Okay? Those are 3 assignments to do in the future, but we may refer back from time to time, but I consider we've pretty much covered the territory for you to do that now. Okay? Do you have anything on your mind at this point? Next week, let me look here. Next week, we're supposed to have Mr. Woke in to talk to us about alternatives to lecture. And there is a reading assignment related to that. And that's about all that's going on, other than observations, get them caught up as you can, your written observations. I need to come to you about observations. Really, that's all I have today. As far as I'm concerned, everybody can go, but I want my tutors to be down there ready to go at 3 o'clock. So if you need a little break in between to use the restroom or grab something or whatever, you can do that.
The perception of that parent may very well be that that parent knows as much about schooling as you do. That person does not call the attorney and act as if they know as much about schooling as you do. That person doesn't call the physician and act as if they know as much about medicine as you do. But they will call you and they will presume to know as much about education as you do. And if you take that telephone call and you start backing on and say, yes ma'am, yes sir, and golly, I don't know, it's kind of like this, it's better. You're going to play into those parents' perceptions that they do know as much about it as you do. Therefore, it is very important that you be well educated in terms of the totality of education, in terms of the totality of the way the school is run, and your role, and the student's role, and be very pleasant, be very cordial, be very professional, but also be very assertive in terms of the fact that you know what you're doing. Otherwise, you will be on the defensive because there's a perception that anybody can teach. Very few people have been in an operating room. Very few people have made a summation before a jury. But everybody's been in school. And everybody feels that they kind of know what goes on there and that they can do it. So all of these things are very important in terms of how you view yourself as a professional. And it may seem as if I haven't really touched a great deal on the first couple of chapters, but what I'm trying to do, as I said, is go beyond the textbook in terms of what some of these things are in the ramifications. Okay? It takes a unanimous vote for us to meet next Monday. When would that be? All right, have a good weekend, guys.